There's something nobody warns you about when you survive a wreck that should have killed you. It's not the pain you expect. It's the silence afterward. The strange underwater quiet where the world keeps moving and your body just floats somewhere between here and gone. You hear things, pieces of things, voices that don't belong to anyone you can see, machines beeping like they're keeping score of something you didn't agree to play. And then one morning, without any fanfare at all, your eyes open, and you find out exactly what people do when they think you're never coming back. Welcome back to Dad's Honest Revenge. Settle in, pour yourself something strong, and remember, every person in this story had the option to do the right thing. Not one of them took it. Drop a comment and subscribe. You're going to want to be here for this. My name is Frank Dolan. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a firefighter in Clarkston, Georgia, retired at 58 with a pension, 2 bad knees, and more smoke in my lungs than any doctor would consider acceptable. I also had a house. Not a house. The house. A 4-bedroom stone-front colonial on Ridge Creek Lane that I bought in 1994 for a price that would make you weep with jealousy by today's standards. I renovated that place over 28 years with my own 2 hands. The kitchen backsplash, hand-laid. The back deck, built it twice because the first time I used the wrong lumber and spent an entire summer cursing at pressure-treated pine. The fireplace mantel was reclaimed chestnut from a barn demolition in Ellijay. That house was not an investment. That house was my autobiography written in drywall and hardwood. I was driving home from the hardware store on a Saturday afternoon in March, because apparently the universe decided that a man buying wood screws and a new door hinge was a man who needed to be T-boned by a delivery truck running a red light on Peachtree Industrial. I don't remember the impact. I remember the smell of coffee from the cup I'd set in the console, and then I remember nothing for 26 days. Now, before I tell you what happened during those 26 days, I need you to understand my son, Michael. I raised that boy with his mother, Caroline, until she passed from cancer when Michael was 14. After that, it was just us. 2 guys in a house too big for 2 people. Learning to cook meals that didn't come from a box. Figuring out laundry. Sitting on that back deck on Friday nights eating pizza and not talking about how much we missed her because we didn't need to talk about it. It was just there, between us, like weather. I taught him to change a tire, to shake a hand like he meant it, to look people in the eye, and to never, under any circumstances, let someone else define what he was worth. I thought those lessons stuck. He married Vanessa 6 years ago. Vanessa was pretty, in the way that certain women are pretty, where you notice it immediately, and then spend the next several years wondering if there's anything behind it. Thin smile. Excellent posture. The kind of laugh that activated on cue at dinner parties and deactivated the moment the audience left the room. She worked in real estate, which she mentioned within the first 90 seconds of every conversation she'd ever had with any human being. And then there was Vanessa's mother, Gail. Let me take a moment here because Gail deserves a proper introduction. Gail Pemberton was a woman who had elevated passive aggression to a performing art. She was 61, blonde in a way that required significant financial commitment, and possessed the unique ability to insult you so gracefully that you'd thank her before you realized what had happened. She'd walk into my home and say things like, "Frank, this is so cozy," with an emphasis on cozy that made 2,400 square feet sound like a storage unit. She'd touch my kitchen countertops and say, "These have so much character," the way someone might compliment a very old dog that could no longer climb stairs. Her husband, Dale, was a retired insurance adjuster who had apparently retired from having opinions as well. He stood where Gail told him to stand, nodded when Gail told him to nod, and occasionally made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been his soul quietly leaving his body. I'd watched Gail eye my property for years. She'd bring it up at Thanksgiving with the subtlety of a freight train. "Frank, you know, a man living alone in a house this size, it's just so much upkeep. Have you thought about downsizing?" Michael and Vanessa could really use the space, and Dale and I would be happy to help with the transition. Like I was a season changing, not a man being asked to leave his own home. I'd smile, pass the gravy, and file it away in the part of my brain labeled people who will absolutely try something if given the chance. So there I was, 26 days unconscious in Grady Memorial. Tubes in places I'd rather not think about. Machines doing the breathing my lungs were apparently too tired to handle. And while I floated in that nowhere place, the people I loved most were making decisions I would have burned the world to prevent. I woke up on a Wednesday. Not dramatically. Not like the movies where your eyes snap open and you say something profound. More like a slow boot up of a very old computer. Lights too bright. Throat made of sandpaper. A nurse named Denise standing over me with the calm professionalism of someone who sees people return from the edge every week and has learned not to make a fuss. She said, "Welcome back, Mr. Dolan. You've had quite a nap." Then she handed me ice chips like they were a reward, which honestly at that point they were. Michael came that afternoon. He walked in carrying a smoothie from somewhere, wearing a polo shirt I didn't recognize, and the expression of a man who has something enormous sitting on his chest and has decided to pretend it's not there. "Hey, Dad." He set the smoothie on the table, pulled a chair close, and sat down. No hug, no hand on my shoulder. Just sat and blinked and looked at the wall behind my head. I studied him for a moment. That wasn't my son's face. My son's face, the real one, crumpled with relief when good things happened. This face was managed, controlled, rehearsed. I tried to speak and it came out like gravel. "You look terrible," I said, which wasn't what I'd planned to say first, but it was accurate. He almost smiled. "Almost. You should see yourself. Faire point." For about 10 minutes we talked around everything. The doctors said this, the nurses said that. Physical therapy would start soon. Surface talk. Gift wrapping paper over whatever was actually in the box. Then he left, and I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them, because when you've been unconscious for 26 days, counting ceiling tiles feels like an accomplishment. He visited 3 more times over the next 2 weeks, each visit shorter, each conversation thinner. On the 3rd visit, he brought Vanessa, who stood in the doorway like the room might be contagious, said, "You look great, Frank," in a voice that suggested I looked like something recovered from a shipwreck, and then spent the rest of the visit on her phone. It was the 4th visit when everything detonated. Michael came alone. He was holding a manila folder, which in my experience is never a good sign. Nobody brings good news in a manila folder. He sat down, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and produced the following sentence. "Dad, while you were in the hospital, we had to make some arrangements regarding the house. I was mid-bite of a pudding cup. I set the spoon down." What kind of arrangements? Financial arrangements. The medical costs were significant, and Vanessa's parents offered to help, and there was the power of attorney you signed back when you had your knee replacements, and we used it to. The folder was shaking slightly in his hands. "The property's been transferred to Gail and Dale. They said it was the most practical." "Dad, I didn't yell. I want you to know that. I didn't throw the pudding cup, though the thought did cross my mind with considerable enthusiasm. What I did was set both hands flat on the hospital blanket, palms down, the way you set your hands when you need to physically hold yourself in place. And I looked at my son, this boy I'd raised, this man I'd built, sitting there with a manila folder full of paper that said my home, my 28 years, my chestnut mantle, and my hand-laid backsplash, and my twice-built deck, now belonged to a woman who had called my kitchen cozy. "Michael," I said, and my voice was very, very quiet, which if you knew me, you'd know was the dangerous register. The yelling means I'm angry. The quiet means I'm something else entirely. Did Gail suggest this? He couldn't look at me. Vanessa and her mother worked with an attorney. They said it was standard, that the POA covered. Who was the attorney, Michael? Was it someone you chose? Or someone Gail already had in her contacts? The silence in that room was so complete I could hear the IV drip. He finally whispered, it was someone her mother knew. I picked my spoon back up. I looked at the pudding. I set the spoon back down because I'd lost the ability to want pudding, which should tell you exactly how serious this was. "I need you to leave now," I said. "Dad, Michael, leave." He left. He left that manila folder on the chair, which I later picked up and read cover to cover 3 times, until the words stopped meaning anything and became just shapes that represented the specific way my own family had gutted me while I slept. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that Gail didn't know, that Vanessa didn't know, that nobody on this earth knew except me and one other person. 9 years ago, my older brother Eddie passed away. Eddie had been a quiet man, a carpenter like our father, who had spent his life building things and saving money and telling no one about either. When he died, his will left me a property I'd barely known existed, a cabin on 6 acres outside Dahlonega, up in the North Georgia mountains, titled under the Dolan Brothers Trust, a trust Eddie had set up decades earlier with an attorney in Gainesville, who was now also deceased. The trust paid its own property taxes from an account Eddie had funded. It didn't appear in my name on any public record. It didn't appear on any tax filing under Frank Dolan. It existed in a parallel financial universe that Gail's hungry little property searches could never have touched. I hadn't visited the cabin in 4 years, but I'd never forgotten it was there. Because a man who spends 31 years running into burning buildings learns one thing above all others: always know your exits. I picked up my phone and called the only person I trusted completely. Her name was Ruth. Ruth Nakamura, 59, retired JAG attorney, current full-time gardener, and part-time terror of the Clarkston HOA board. She'd lived next door to me on Ridge Creek Lane for 16 years. She answered on the first ring. "Frank Dolan, I've been waiting for this call. You know? I know that your house now has different curtains, and Gail Pemberton has been hosting book club in your living room. How do you know about the curtains? Frank, I can see your living room window from my kitchen. Those curtains are criminal. They're mauve." She paused. "What do you need?" "Everything," I said. "I need everything." "Then let me tell you what I've got," she said. And what Ruth had was extraordinary. Because Ruth, bless that woman, was a former military attorney, with the instincts of a surveillance drone and the patience of someone who had spent 20 years prosecuting cases that required airtight evidence. From the first week I'd been in the hospital, she'd noticed Gail and Dale coming and going from my property, and something hadn't felt right, so she'd started documenting. Photographs with timestamps. A log of every vehicle that parked in my driveway, every moving truck that arrived, every contractor Gail hired to do work on a house she didn't own yet. Ruth had 47 days of documentation. Date, time, activity, photograph. I could have wept. Instead, I said, "Ruth, I owe you more than I can possibly express. You owe me nothing. You're my neighbor, and those mauve curtains are an assault on the entire street. Now go get your house back." I hung up and sat in that hospital bed, and felt something I hadn't felt since I'd woken up. Not anger. I'd had plenty of that. Purpose. The kind of purpose that settles into your bones and makes every next step feel inevitable. I was discharged on a Monday morning. Ruth picked me up in her spotless gray Subaru, handed me a thermos of coffee, and drove without speaking for 10 minutes. Then she said, "Spencer's been waiting for you to call." Spencer was Spencer Hale, an attorney in Decatur I'd known for 22 years. He'd handled my brother's estate, which meant he was one of exactly 2 people alive who knew about the cabin and the trust. I called him from the car. "Spencer, I need you to pull the Dolan Brothers Trust, the cabin title, everything, and I need you to look at a property transfer on Ridge Creek Lane and tell me how badly they messed up." A pause. "How badly are we talking?" "I think the power of attorney they used expired the day I opened my eyes." Another pause. "Longer this time." "Frank," Spencer said slowly, "if that's true," and he paused again for emphasis, "then they transferred your property without legal authority. And that's not just reversible, that's actionable. I'll have everything by Friday." Ruth glanced at me from the driver's seat. She was smiling, the small, controlled smile of a woman who had prosecuted war crimes and found property fraud almost charmingly manageable by comparison. We drove to the cabin first. It sat at the end of a dirt road off Route 60, surrounded by hardwoods that had turned the afternoon light green and gold. Cedar-sided metal roof, a wraparound porch that looked out over a meadow sloping down to a creek. Eddie had built it himself over 2 summers in the late 1990s, and he'd built it the way our father had taught us both. Solid. Honest. The kind of construction that doesn't need to announce itself because it simply endures. The inside was dusty but sound. Pine floors, stone fireplace, kitchen with appliances from 2009 that still worked fine because Eddie had bought quality. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a screened porch off the back where you could hear the creek at night. I stood in the main room for a long time, looking at the fireplace my brother had built, the mantel he'd sanded and finished by hand. And I felt him there, not in any mystical way, but in the practical way that people who build things leave themselves in every joint and corner. "I'm here, Eddie," I said out loud. I know, I could almost hear him say. About time. Over the next 4 weeks I worked. Ruth had connected me with two guys from her church, both retired tradesmen, who showed up with tools and the specific energy of men who were delighted to have a project, and even more delighted when they heard why. We refinished the floors, replaced the porch railing, updated the bathroom fixtures, stained the exterior a deep cedar red. I rebuilt the kitchen countertops myself because some things a man needs to do with his own hands. Meanwhile, on Ridge Creek Lane, Gail was living her best life. Ruth kept me updated with the detached precision of an intelligence briefing. "Gail has replaced your kitchen backsplash with subway tile," she reported one Tuesday. "Subway tile," I repeated. "White subway tile." "I built that backsplash myself, Ruth." "I know. It took you a weekend and a half." I was there. She also reported that Gail had converted my garage into what she described as a wellness space, which apparently involved removing my workbench and tool wall and replacing them with yoga mats and a diffuser that released lavender mist at intervals. My workbench. The workbench my father built. The workbench I'd had for 40 years. I absorbed this information the way I'd learned to absorb information in burning buildings. Acknowledge it, file it, keep moving toward the exit. Spencer called me on a Friday evening. I was on the cabin porch watching the creek catch the last daylight. "Frank, I finished my review. The power of attorney you signed in 2017 for the knee surgery contained standard expiration language. It terminated upon your recovery of legal capacity. The moment you woke up, it was void. The transfer was executed 8 days after you regained consciousness. It's unsigned by you, unauthorized, and in my professional opinion, it wouldn't survive a preliminary hearing, much less a trial." I exhaled slowly. "There's more," he said. I ran background on Gail and Dale Pemberton. Standard litigation preparation. And I found something. What kind of something? 4 years ago, in Beaufort, South Carolina, an elderly man named Wallace. Widower, early 70s. His son had married a woman connected to the Pemberton social circle. Wallace suffered a fall. Extended hospitalization. While he was incapacitated, a financial power of attorney was used to liquidate his investment accounts and redirect the proceeds into a joint account with the son and daughter-in-law. Over $340,000. By the time Wallace recovered and contested it, the money had been moved through 3 accounts, and most of it was gone. He settled out of court for a fraction. There was no criminal prosecution. He died 2 years later. I sat very still. "Frank," Spencer said, "this isn't a family that made a bad decision under pressure. This is a pattern. These people know exactly what they're doing. They've done it before, and without someone stopping them, they'll do it again." I thought about Wallace, a man I'd never met, sitting in some hospital in South Carolina, waking up to discover that the people around his bed had already emptied his life. Nobody warned him. Nobody stopped it. Nobody made it right. "Not this time," I said. "No," Spencer agreed. "Not this time. I want you to find Wallace's family," I said. "Any surviving relatives who might want to know what you found." "I'll make some calls," he said. "And Frank?" "Yeah?" "I've drafted the filing. I'd like to submit it on Tuesday. I'd like them served on a Wednesday, middle of the week, middle of the day, when people feel most comfortable." "There's something about being comfortable," he said, "that makes the surprise land harder." Spencer had a gift for these things. They were served on a Wednesday at 2:15 the afternoon. I know the exact time because Ruth saw it happen from her kitchen window and called me with the play-by-play. "A process server in a blue shirt just walked up your front steps and rang the bell." Dale answered. "He's reading it. He's calling for Gail. Gail's at the door now. She's reading it. Oh, Frank, I wish you could see her face. She looks like she just discovered that gravity is optional and the ground has personal opinions." I could hear Ruth trying not to laugh, which for a woman of her discipline was a significant crack in the armor. Michael called me that night. I let it ring 5 times. "Dad." His voice was stripped bare. None of the rehearsal, none of the management, just a 3-5. "You're old man who had finally looked down and realized the ground he'd been standing on belonged to someone else. Dad, we got papers today, and I don't. I need to understand. The papers are fairly self-explanatory, Michael. You're contesting the transfer. I am. A long silence. Dad, I thought we were doing the right thing. Vanessa said. Gail said, Stop. I said it gently but firmly. Stop telling me what Vanessa said and what Gail said. Tell me what you thought. Tell me at what point my son, the boy I raised to look people in the eye and think for himself, decided that signing away his father's home felt right. Because I need to understand that, Michael. I need to understand where I lost you. I heard him breathing. I heard something that might have been a hand pressed over a mouth to hold something in. It didn't feel right, he said finally, his voice cracking. It never felt right. Not once. But they kept saying, and Vanessa kept saying, and the attorney kept saying, and I just went along with it because it was easier than fighting all of them at the same time. I know, I said. And that's the part that breaks my heart. Not that you did it. That you couldn't say no. That is the thing I didn't teach you well enough, and I'm sorry for that. He was crying. I could hear it. The specific sound of a grown man trying not to cry on the phone with his father, which is one of the worst sounds on earth. I need you to listen to me, I said. I need you to think carefully about who Gail has been to you since the day you married her daughter. Not who she said she was. Who she's been. What she's done. How she's treated you when nobody was performing. And then I need you to decide whether the man your mother would have wanted you to become is the man sitting in my house right now under mauve curtains. I hung up. And I sat on that porch in the mountain dark, listening to the creek, carrying the weight of loving someone and being furious with them simultaneously, which if you've ever been a parent, you know is the heaviest thing a human being can carry. The hearing was on a Thursday. I wore a navy suit, clean shirt, no tie. Spencer and I arrived 20 minutes early. We sat at the plaintiff's table, and Spencer arranged his documents with the quiet precision of a man who builds cases the way my brother built cabins, to last. Gail and Dale arrived with their attorney, a woman in a sharp black suit who carried herself like she'd already won, which told me she hadn't yet read the full filing. Gail saw me across the courtroom, and for one fraction of a second, before she could rearrange her face, I saw it. Recognition. Not of me, Frank Dolan, her neighbor, the man whose house she'd taken. Recognition that the man sitting at that table was not the unconscious body she'd planned around. He was awake. He was dressed. He was ready. And he was looking directly at her. She recovered quickly. Gail was good at recovering. She sat down, crossed her ankles, and produced a smile of polite bewilderment, as if this whole proceeding was simply a misunderstanding that would be cleared up shortly. The judge was the Honorable Marcus Webb, early 60s, reading glasses. The demeanor of a man who had processed every flavor of human selfishness the legal system could produce, and had developed a very low tolerance for nonsense. He reviewed both filings. He asked Spencer 2 questions. He asked Gail's attorney 4 questions, each one of which produced an answer slightly less confident than the one before. Then he removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and spoke. The power of attorney presented, as the basis for this property transfer, contained explicit expiration language tied to the grantor's recovery of legal capacity. Medical records confirmed the plaintiff regained consciousness on March 29th. The transfer was executed on April 6th. The court finds the transfer was executed without valid legal authority. The property is ordered, restored to the plaintiff. 6 sentences. 28 years of my life, returned in 6 sentences. Gail's attorney leaned over immediately, whispering. Dale stared at the table as if it contained instructions he desperately needed. Gail sat perfectly still, and I watched her cycle through several expressions in rapid succession before settling on dignified disbelief, the expression of a woman who could not fathom that the world had failed to cooperate with her plans. Outside the courtroom, in the hallway, I was standing by a window looking at the parking lot and drinking vending machine coffee that tasted like regret when I heard heels on marble behind me. I turned. Gail, alone. No Dale, no attorney. Just a woman in a cream blazer who had just watched 28 years of someone else's life slip out of her hands. She looked at me for a moment. Frank, she said, and her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. This didn't have to go this way. We could have worked something out. I took a sip of terrible coffee. Like you worked something out with Wallace? The name landed like a stone in still water. Her face didn't change dramatically. It was more like watching a screen flicker, a momentary disruption in the broadcast before the signal tried to reassemble itself. But it didn't fully reassemble. Something behind her eyes shifted. The calculation that was always running, always assessing, always 3 moves ahead, hit a wall it hadn't anticipated. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the rhythm was wrong. Too fast, too flat. "His family knows now," I said simply. "They know what you did, and they know what you did to me. And those 2 things together, Gail, paint a picture that no amount of book clubs and mauve curtains can cover up." She didn't speak. For the first time in the years I'd known her, Gail Pemberton had nothing to say. She turned and walked down that hallway, heels clicking on marble, and I watched her go with the specific, irreplaceable satisfaction of a man who had waited patiently, built carefully, and watched the whole thing come together exactly the way it was supposed to. I moved back into my Ridge Creek Lane house on a Saturday morning. Ruth was on her porch watering geraniums. She set down the watering can, walked to the property line, and hugged me once, firmly, which for Ruth was the emotional equivalent of a ticker tape parade. "The curtains," she said, pulling back. "Today. Today," I promised. She nodded once and returned to her geraniums. I walked into my house. It smelled wrong. Lavender diffuser, different soap, the particular scent of someone else's life layered over yours. I opened every window. I stood in the kitchen where the subway tile had replaced my backsplash, and I just breathed. I'd fix it. I'd fix all of it. Because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. Michael came over 3 weeks later. No Vanessa. Just my son, thinner in the face, quieter in the eyes, carrying a bag of groceries and a 6-pack of the beer I like, the one he always said tasted like lawn clippings. He set the groceries on the counter and started unpacking without being asked. Chicken, vegetables, pasta, the kind of meal his mother used to make on Sunday nights. We cooked together without talking much. The kitchen was enough, the sounds of water boiling and a knife on a cutting board and 2 people who'd been through something finding their way back to normal by doing something ordinary. "Over dinner," he said, "Vanessa and I are separated." I nodded. "I'm sorry." "I'm not," he said, and then caught himself. "I mean, I am. But I'm also—" He stared at his plate. "I'm also relieved. And I don't know what to do with that." "You sit with it," I told him. "You don't have to do anything with it right now. You just let it be what it is." He looked up at me. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know. I should have said no. I should have fought them. I should have been the person you raised me to be." I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. "You are the person I raised you to be," I said. "You just forgot for a while. People do that. The important part is what you do now." He nodded. The kind of nod that means a person has decided something and intends to stick with it. We finished dinner. We sat on the back deck, the deck I'd built twice, with the beer that tasted like lawn clippings. And we didn't talk about Caroline, but she was there, the way she always was, in the space between us, in the quiet. The cabin in Dahlonega, it's still mine. I drive up there every couple of weeks, usually on a Sunday. I make coffee, I sit on the porch Eddie built, I watch the creek do what creeks do, which is move forward without worrying about what's behind it. I think about Eddie. I think about Wallace, whose daughter in Beaufort I've now spoken with twice on the phone. She cried the first time. The second time she told me she'd retained an attorney. Sometimes the only thing standing between a good person and injustice is one other good person who refuses to look away. Spencer told me something the week before the hearing that I think about often. He said, "Frank, the people who do this, the Gales of the world, they count on one thing above everything else. They count on decent people being too tired, too hurt, or too polite to fight back. That's their whole business model." I think about that while I'm sitting on Eddie's porch, drinking coffee, watching the light come through the hardwoods. I think about 31 years of running into buildings that were on fire. I think about the first rule they taught us at the academy, the one that every firefighter learns before anything else. Never assume the fire is out, just because you can't see the flames. My name is Frank Dolan. I spent my whole life walking into dangerous places and finding my way out. And the most important thing I ever learned wasn't how to fight the fire. It was how to wait, how to watch, how to let the smoke clear, and then walk through the door at exactly the right moment, when nobody expected me to still be standing. If this story hit home, if you know what it feels like to fight for something that's yours, join this community. Subscribe, hit that like button, and come back for more. Because there are a lot of Franks out there, and a lot of Gails. And somebody needs to tell these stories so the Franks know they're not alone. As always, thank you. I mean that.